My name is Carl Kuo, and this is Founder Quest, a podcast about the journeys of starting a game studio. Today we're talking with Pavel of Northern Lights Entertainment. Pavel's founding journey is a fresh one we haven't heard before, that starts during student protests in Hong Kong and goes through to a paper written on his way to a master's degree in economics and business. And all of this was built on experiences and forums for a large web strategy game and a passion for bringing political systems to players inside of games. Along the way, Pavel met his co-founder, built a team, got funding, and found that karaoke and the community he found there was important to his sanity as a founder. I really enjoy when folks find their way to founding a studio from fresh perspectives, and found Pavel's to be incredibly compelling. Let's jump in. The way I always like to start is to find out more about the moment you decided to start a company, right? Like, I think there's always that moment where it goes from, well, maybe I should do this, or I'm researching to do this, or I'm thinking about doing this, to that point where you're like mentally and emotionally committed to actually starting a studio. And I'm always curious, like, what was that moment and what led up to it?
So thank you for having me. I think if I had to single such moments in time, one would be around 2014. So 11 years ago, which is a while back, where I was an exchange student in Hong Kong. And if you remember, or if the audience remembers, 2014 was the beginning of the Umbrella movement, the student pro-democracy movement in Hong Kong. And me and my co-founder, Julie, actually met on one of the two university campuses in Hong Kong where the movement started. So we were in the Chinese University of Hong Kong. And so we personally witnessed and lived through, the sit-ins and the student speeches, and the students from the translation department being carefully dispersed among the crowd of the international students and live translating all of the speeches. And my co-founder Julie and I, we love games. That's why we started the game studio, and we've been playing games pretty much since either a joystick or a mouse would fit in our hands. So that's a long time ago now. But basically discussing the impact of games and culture and politics, because that's the angle that our studio takes. That's kind of those first conversations, they really happened in 2014 in that specific, very politically charged context. Mm-hmm. The second such moment where I was really thinking, okay, this can actually be a real thing. It can be a business, was when I was writing a white paper for one of my entrepreneurship classes in the first year of my master's degree, which was in 2016. End of 2016. So again, very politically charged context, because the Brexit vote had just happened. Trump just got elected for the first time, and Macron was about to be elected in just a few months for his first term as the president of France, which was like very much a political revolution in the country, which was always going from, left to right, and Macron positioning himself as this rather centrist candidate, which was quite new or unexpected. Mm-hmm. And the paper was like very much focused around this idea of making politics playable, and maybe we'll get to talk about it a little bit later on. And when I was distributing this paper, not just to, the teacher who was supervising the class, but actually to like all of my friends, including Julie, it's like, hey, can you provide me some feedback on this? And like, what do you think? And do you think this is viable? And what would you do differently? And how would you make it like even more awesome? And when this feedback started to come in, and I think I was pretty much handing this paper out almost like a flyer, to anybody who was willing and able to read it. And I think I got like maybe 50, 60, maybe 70 pieces of individual feedback from people who either were players or weren't players, but were like me, deeply into the political science studies. Or international relations, and that's when I realized that, hey, actually there's something there, and it can be an interesting piece of um, culturally impactful content that could be created. And I guess the third moment was when Julie and I were accepted into the university incubator of the school that we went to. And this was actually prior to the legal entity of the studio being created. And so when we got the kind of the admission notification, we were like, okay, it's happening. This is real. Or it can be real if we choose it to be real.
Yeah. I think something like that sort of acceptance is a great forcing function of like, oh, I guess we should, create the entity or something.
Yeah, in our particular context, like, we needed to create the entity because, fun fact, neither myself nor Julie are technical from an engineering point of view, and I draw like a drunk chicken. So when you have two co-founders who want to create a strategy MMO and neither of them codes, and one of them does not have a particularly good eye for all things related to arts, like, yeah, you need a legal entity because you need to hire people and you need co-workers. So yes, it was a great forcing function, as you say.
Yeah, absolutely. Once, you sort of broke it down in this really great way of like, hey, here's these inspiration moments of like forming the idea, really feeling conviction that it could be real. And then, sort of the capstone is the validation of like, okay, we're accepted into an incubator. So this is the ball is sort of rolling. From sort of like that second moment where you're like distributing this paper and you're getting a ton of really great feedback and validation that, hey, this idea I have feels really real, through to sort of that moment of like, okay, and now we're in an incubator, so we're going. What do you feel like you really had to go out and learn, right? Like, what was the big learning journey that you're like, okay, now I'm committed to this. Now I have to learn what I'm doing with it. What was that like, right? Like, what was the focus there? What did you find you personally had to go and really invest in learning?
So I think there's two aspects of it, and one of them was conscious and important, and the other one was unconscious, but probably even more important. I'll start with the unconscious one because it makes for better sound bites, I think. The unconscious one is that between the moment where the paper was ready, which is roughly November, December 2016, and the moment I started distributing it, which was roughly at the same time, and the moment where we got accepted into the incubator of our school or university, there was a time lapse of approximately 1.5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And the unconscious but incredibly precious learning in that time frame was actually starting to work together with Julie, who is my co-founder. And we were friends since 2014. We were really, really good friends pretty instantly because, the Hong Kong story kind of really brought us close together. We're not romantically involved by any means, because if you are the audience funder, but it's a very different beast in a way to be really good friends with someone and then actually starting a company with them. And quite frequently, when in entrepreneurship classes, you analyze, the co-founder teams and so on, you have those three big families. You have, starting a company with a family member, starting a company with a good friend, and starting a company with a former colleague.
Mm-hmm.
And each of them have advantages and disadvantages. We went for the friend option very clearly, but we actually used this pre-preparation time of 1.5 years to get to know each other, to understand how Julie and I communicate differently, because we're very, very different people. We have a lot of interests in common. We have a lot of hobbies in common, but we have a different way in which our brains function, which is actually a strength, a plus. But you have to get used to it, and so it's like we use this time as oiling the machine, which today fuels not just the vision behind what the studio does, but also how we communicate with other members of our team, how we hire people, how we define our product vision, how we split it into sprints, how we raise money externally, because that's an exercise that we've done twice now. And many other aspects of studio governance and negotiations and just average like daily life within the studio. So that's the unconscious aspect. The conscious aspect of this work was everything related to external potential player feedback. So beyond just distributing the white paper to a whole bunch of people, some of whom I knew very well, others whom I knew vaguely. What was extremely important is trying to understand to what extent this idea around playable politics had a reach, or a potential reach, going beyond our rather narrow niche of political science students who happen to be gaming junkies.
Mm-hmm.
And it turned out that, when you spend a year and a half talking to players on forums and soliciting people in Russia, in Finland, in Germany, in France, in the UK, in the United States, Canada, and like reaching out to some of our contacts back in Hong Kong and so on, like actually you get a pretty decent feeling for where the vibes are at in terms of what players would like to see, and what is missing or what they feel is a frustration in some of the back then existing games that they were playing. And so you're basically, it's like having putting your hand on the pulse of the world, so to speak. Obviously in our narrow sample size, but still trying to reach into as many places, into as many cultures, and not necessarily only reaching out to friends, but like really trying to solicit people on forums and randomly, and sometimes on the street or in a cafe, or in an airport. So very, very precious time, and this was a very conscious effort on our part to try to understand, like, are we crazy, or is there something there? And it turned out that there was something really, really meaningful and interesting there, which is why we didn't really hesitate. Like, once the admissions letter from the incubator came in, like, the choice was pretty obvious. Like, yes, we're doing this, and this is going to be the project that we're focusing on for upcoming however many years.
It's been a few years, and as you mentioned, you've gone through some fundraising cycles and you've been building for a while. When you look back at that sort of those early moments where it turned from idea into I'm committing to go and do a startup, right? Like, I'm committing to go and build a business around this passion and this relationship, and this friendship and this idea. A lot of the audience for this podcast are folks who are somewhere on that journey, right? Thinking about starting a business, have an idea, not sure if they're gonna jump for it. Having had a bunch of experience since then and looking back on your journey, what would be the biggest learning sort of from the journey so far about that decision point that you would be like, if you're thinking about starting a startup, go and invest in this or go and learn this because it's what's going to be impactful to your journey?
I would front load on passion and optimism above anything else, because you have to believe, like, whatever the genre, whatever the platform, whatever the geography or target audience or market where you plan for your studio to operate, it will always be tough, especially at the very, very early stages, and you're going to have 1,517 different ways to not continue or quit or abandon, or there's going to be a job offer that might come in, and you're going to have some very serious conversations, first of all with yourself, and then with whatever your future co-founder composition team composition is going to be, about whether is this worth it. So you really, really have to front load on passion, not just for yourself, but as we Julie and I say internally for the studio, and we don't hesitate also to say it publicly, you have to believe in what you're doing for 10,000 people. And in these 10,000 people, you have to include your first coworkers, you have to include your first investors or publishers if you're going, yeah, whichever financing route you're going for. Like, you have to front load on the passion for them to be able to convince them, because otherwise, like, nobody's going to fund you. You have to front load on passion and conviction for your first however many thousands of players, because that's like getting from 0 to 1 in terms of building your player community is also like a very, very tough aspect of the job, because it's not just about making games, it's also about finding a way to distribute them, which is really important for the commercial viability of your studio, but also actually getting the game to the people for whom you were making the game in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, front load on passion and front load on optimism as well, because if you are the sort of person who only sees problems or only sees barriers or obstacles, and you have nobody on your co-founding team who has this level of delusional, irrational optimism, which in our case is me, uh, it 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 can be really, really hard, because you, like, just life has a way of throwing really dramatic curveballs at you in your personal life, in your funding cycles, or in your alpha releases, or in, I don't know, hiring decisions, or maybe hiring mistakes that you're going to make. And it is extremely important to, like, it's a very tough balance between trying to keep a cool head and saying, like, okay, like, yes, this is a problem. I recognize that this is a problem, but it doesn't matter, because we're going to find a way to solve it somehow, on one hand. And on the other hand, it's like having this very deep conviction that the day of tomorrow is always going to be better than the day of today.
Mm-hmm.
And this is really difficult for some people. Like, it's very easy for me. I don't know why. I'm not sure I can explain it. Especially, with, the political context that we're living through now. And,
Mm-hmm.
there is a war in Europe and climate change and this and that and the other. But yeah, somehow you have to find a way to believe that the day of tomorrow is going to be better. And if that is your core belief about life in general, it makes entrepreneurship significantly easier, because, like, you basically derive your future success as something that is inevitably going to happen because of how you see life.
I want to jump back very quickly to talking about you and Julie and the sort of co-founder makeup that you went for. And you sort of described a bunch of stuff that I want to dig deeper on. But one of the things that you sort of mentioned was like, hey, we're really good friends. And so we have a built-in trust, but then we spend a bunch of time talking through all this other stuff to build up that sort of co-founder relationship. You also framed it, though, as like, hey, neither Julie or I know how to code, right? You don't have much of an art background or skills, right? So when you think about that sort of co-founder makeup of like, why are you and Julie the right mix of co-founders? How do you frame that? What do you talk about when you say, here's what I bring to the table, here's what she brings to the table as far as carrying the business forward? And if you could just talk a little bit about that and potentially why you didn't look at any additional co-founders into the mix, like finding a technical co-founder is not an uncommon path that people go on, and just sort of like how you two ended up thinking about that co-founder mix and that in deciding that that was the right mix for the journey.
So we realized very early on that the technical aspect was going to be a challenge, because, like, we can't do code. So there was a very, like, interesting and long discussion around, like, do we need a technical co-founder? Are we going to try to hire around this problem, and so on? And we opted for the hiring option, in part because we felt confident enough in our ability to recruit externally. And this is directly tied to the fact that actually in my past professional experience, I was a recruiter. So I know how to source candidates. I know how to interview them. I worked at Amazon previously. I worked at PayPal. Amazon, I think, is notoriously well described as having one of the toughest recruitment processes in the world of tech, so to speak, that you can have. And so there's quite a lot that we borrowed from them. I learned a bunch of stuff also working at PayPal. So in the end, we ended up doing a mix and match between what we perceived as being, the best elements of the respective recruitment processes that I saw, but also that Julie saw in her professional life. So there was that, and the other aspect of it is that because we're based in France, just the depth of the technical talent there, in particular in the world of video games, is tremendous. And so we, being based in Paris, we never felt that we were going to basically run out of people to hire. In particular because French video game schools, but also existing French video game companies, but schools in particular, basically they create an influx of new talent in the video games industry, which is much larger than what the existing French companies can absorb. And so this has two consequences. The first one is that it depresses salaries. Because basically, well, if the demand for jobs massively exceeds supply, well, price goes down. And the other consequence being is that you can very much try to single out people who are going to be, as we call them, crusaders rather than mercenaries. It's a framework that we have developed inside, but I think other people call it like maybe missionaries versus mercenaries, but like we call them crusaders. And the idea being like you can really single out members of your future team who are there not just for the money, because money is important and everybody has to eat and we all have, student debts to pay and so on. And I'll get back to that in a second. Because I actually used like a portion of my student loan to fund the company from the beginning. And haven't looked back at it since then. Greatest decision of my life, one of them at least. And so yeah, basically if you have a depth of technical and artistic talent in the place where you start the studio, you can afford, in our particular context, not to have a co-founder and basically hire around the gaps in the team that you might have.
When you really talked through, like you mentioned that sort of unconsciously, so perhaps not as intentionally as you could have. You spent a year and a half really building that relationship of being co-founders with Julie and negotiating through what is, how are we going to make decisions? How are we going to govern the company? How are we going to balance our roles and our efforts and all that kind of stuff? And that gave you a really good basis on top of a really great friendship to build the studio once you guys got started in earnest. I'm curious, looking back at that now, what were the most critical conversations for you two to have to really understand, validate, and build that strong foundation of co-founders? And I ask this especially through the lens of like, I think a lot of people think about like, okay, how do I figure out if we're going to be good co-founders, not just good friends, or good co-founders, not just good co-workers, right? I'm always curious how different people found the right conversations to have and which ones they sort of say like, oh, this was the most important for me.
Can I start with an anecdote?
Of course.
So I think traditionally it is perceived that one of the toughest conversations between, let's say, fresh co-founders or young co-founders is how are we going to split the initial shares of the company? What's the original shareholding structure is going to be? And for us, this was roughly a 7-minute conversation, all like everything combined. We basically decided to go 51-49. Where so 51%, 49%, where basically Julie and I sat down and we agreed that since the original idea came from me, and because I spent like a significant portion of time, like multiple months, prior to actually getting together with Julie and when we joined our forces, it basically amounts to this like slight percentage difference. However, in the same exact conversation, we agreed that basically we would flip back to 50-50 as soon as we onboard first investors into the company. And this was, I think, extremely reassuring for Julie.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it also reassured um, investors with whom we subsequently were negotiating a few years down the line, where basically the company was never going to be in a deadlock, because you always have, well, when it was just the two of us, I basically had, so to speak, the deciding vote. Fun fact, I have never used it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Not once. But basically, as part of the negotiation tactics, European investors in particular, they like to see that, you know, there is no deadlock between co-founders, and so they like to see like that somebody has a majority vote or a golden share or some form of equivalence there. So that's for the anecdote. And regarding the other major conversations that Julie and I had, I think one of those conversations was going around prior to the beginning of the first and prior to the second fundraise that we did, which was how are we going to run this process? Are we going to run it 100% together, or are we going to split our time between, you know, one person does fundraising and the other one basically handles production within the studio? And for the first fundraise, we actually did everything together because we really felt the need to master the process and understand the nature of the world of venture capital, because we didn't want to raise money from a publisher, so we went down the VC and an angel investor route. And I think that was tremendously insightful. And once we have both acquired that fundraising experience in our pre-seed round, which we started in 2020 and completed in 2021, in between the COVID lockdowns, which was really fun, we can maybe get back into that. For the second round, we actually decided, okay, Julie feels much more comfortable in the shoes of a producer role, where she's coordinating the teams, where she is handling production priorities, where she is handling the sprints, you know, basically supervising the tasks that are ongoing within the studio and in between the different teams that we have within the studio. Whereas I apparently have a slightly more solar personality. Not that Julie doesn't; she's extremely solar. But Julie felt that she would get extremely frustrated handling multiple investor rejections over and over and over and over again, and because I have this unkillable level of optimism where it's like, okay, fine, you say no today, but you will definitely say yes tomorrow. We felt that it was a better split.
Mm-hmm.
So that was an interesting conversation, both the first time and the second time.
You know, if we think about it, the weight of the entire business falls down to us as co-founders. And so, you know, for me as sort of the classical CEO business guy, right? Like that means I get to tank fundraising and that's my job. But it also, like, you know, I'm going to tank learning accounting and you know, doing all the operation stuff, which I have a little bit of a background in. So, you know, it works out, but it's also having a conversation like, yeah, and if I take a vacation, one of you two is going to have to make sure payroll pays, right? And so, like, let's understand that, and who's taking publishing and who's taking all this other stuff, right? And just sort of like going through those expectations of each other, and you know, in the good and the bad, right? Like
especially the bad,
especially the
always
bad.
the bad.
Yeah.
Because everybody's happy when everything is like rosy and works and, and there are no bugs in the system. Okay, so maybe a little bit on the decision making. So we have a framework internally which we call ping pong. And there's a brilliant interview, I believe, by Tim Ferriss, who describes the ideation phase, which is kind of where most of the decisions happen in a startup, right? And he draws this beautiful parallel between treating ideas as babies versus treating ideas as machines, and to basically crystallize it, like everybody feels extremely sentimentally attached to babies, and mistreating babies is universally evil. And so if you treat ideas as babies, you're creating an environment where constructive criticism is not always going to be welcome. And it's very hard to navigate the decision-making process without hurting other people's feelings. Whereas if you treat ideas as machines, it's like, hey, I built a robot. And then you basically put the robot on the table and you ask the robot to do some stuff, and then you see how it goes. And then you adjust the robot, or you recalibrate, some wires and so on. And so you kind of there poking fun at the robot, but not at the person. But the ultimate goal is to make the robot better.
Yep.
And so we have internally a culture of writing that is pretty strong, and that I'm very, very proud of. That's my Amazon roots talking. The famous Amazon memos and 6-pagers. We tend to have them much shorter here. But the idea is that in the ideation phase, for example, around a new game mechanic or a new player progression system or something along those lines, there is always like a baseline document. That we go through, and sometimes it's in the form of a presentation, and sometimes it's like silent reading, and sometimes it's asynchronous over email, which in itself doesn't really matter how you do it. But the idea is that in the end, people have like a clear written thing, a written product, and then the ideation work starts, and it's going to be threads and threads of comments and questions and criticisms. It's like, oh, this doesn't work, or this clashes with this other system, or this like makes no sense, or this is unrealistic, or this is technically unfeasible. And so gradually you basically polish it, and in the end you have like a really strong proposal, and then you build a paper prototype around it, or if it's like a marketing campaign, you do like a tiny test with like a maybe tiny marketing budget or something along those lines. So things tend to be I would call it a hard fought consensus. And sometimes it's really easy, right? Like, because sometimes like the first proposal is extremely strong, and then you just polish off a little bit on the edges and it's done. And sometimes, like for example in the case of I don't know, the onboarding process of our game, or how we think about combats, or how we think about player progression when you tie it to politics and political reputation of our players. It takes a while and multiple iterations. But what we try to avoid is this idea that everybody has to agree on the ideas. Is not something that, I mean, obviously, if it's the case, great. But if it's not the case, the best idea still has to win.
Let's switch topics a little bit to every founder's favorite topic of fundraising.
Yay!
You've mentioned a couple times that you guys have gone through a couple funding rounds and done all that. Could you tell us a little bit about how you're funded in whatever detail you're comfortable sharing?
Yeah, sure. No problem at all. And I think a lot of this is actually public. But I don't anticipate there will be any retractions after the episode. So our first round, our pre-seed round, was done with an American-based venture capital fund called Sequoia Capital, with a network of angel investors of the INSEAD Business School, and then some individual angels based between France and the United States. It was a tiny round. It was 325,000 euros in total, which, because we're based in France and the funding matching schemes here are extremely generous, we basically doubled through non-dilutive financing options like tax credits and like regional subsidies and like a low interest loan from the French Public Investment Bank. And so we secured this in 2021. We were bootstrapped until then. And basically this funding round with the non-dilutive top up, so to speak, allowed us to seniorize a team and move like from a team that was comprised of Julie, myself, and several interns over into like a team that included multiple senior professionals with 8, 10, 12, 15 years of experience. So like it really added some firepower and mastery into our ranks, which was great. And what's really great is that the majority of those of this team hired in the aftermath of that round are actually still there, which I like to believe says something about the quality of the workplace environment here at Northern Lights.
It absolutely does.
This Thank you. The second round, we're actually in the closing stages right now, but so we're not shy about kind of our progress in that regard. So we're aiming for a €2 million seed round, of which 3/4 have been signed, a little bit more than 3/4 now. We had some really good news this morning. And this is going to be done on a €5 million pre-money valuation and so €7 million post. And the plan is for us to basically turn around and do the non-dilutive financing top up again, and we're aiming for once more to basically double the equity raised. And so for the second round, it's really cool what we managed to do, because basically the historic investors are participating in the round as well. Some of them, like for example the INSEAD network, are taking more than the pro rata rights. And actually they're bringing new members of the network who skipped or missed the last round for whatever reason into the new round, which is great. We also invited our player community to co-invest alongside institutional investors. And so we have basically created kind of a retail SPV where players can invest, €450, €500, €1,000. I think the highest check we collected was €15,000, which is great.
That's amazing.
Like talking about, your whale audience. So this is awesome, and we're extremely grateful for our players' participation. And last but not least, obviously, new money. So new funds, new angel investors. We have, I believe, 4 American-based venture capital funds participating in the second round. I don't think I should be naming them just yet. But yeah, there are some interesting heavy hitters there. Some also more nascent solo GP funds, but all of them specialized in games. And I think we have a really, really good mix between basically old money and new money, so to speak. And then we have what would be the appropriate term? A host of angel investors also joining us, and there the composition is extremely wide. It goes from Finland to Germany to France to the United States to Australia. Like it's all over the place. So yeah, that's roughly the composition. We're working on some ongoing discussions to help us close the rest of the rounds of these days. Probably not before GDC, most likely not before GDC, but hopefully sometime in early April.
Yeah, that's awesome. So first of all, congratulations, closing fundraising in the day of our Lord, March 2025, is not particularly easy at all. So a big achievement for you guys. I'm really happy to hear that. So if you look at sort of both fundraising rounds and the bootstrapping before that, and the incubator and everything on this path, what's really been the biggest difference between how you thought this would all go with fundraising and what the reality has really been?
Everything takes a lot longer than you anticipate. And the challenge with this is that you do not necessarily know how much longer. Like, you can say, oh, this is going to take, I don't know, arbitrary number, oh, this is going to take, I don't know, 4 months or 6 months or 8 months. Like, whatever the number you're going to take, it will always be longer, but you have to plan out your cash flow of the company in such a way that it can basically assume that the time is going to triple.
Yeah.
And you still have to, find a way to like make everybody eat at least ramen.
Yes.
So everything takes a lot longer. For us, it was, I think, particularly difficult, though. I mean, not that I put other studios' efforts above or below ours, but we do not have an industry background. We have never worked in large studios like Blizzard or Riot Games. We are not the type of founder who are like, oh, I am employee X, Y, and Z at this big game company. And Julie is employed this ABC at that game company, and so we come together, and out of the gate we raise, I don't know, like a 6 million seed round before the legal entity is created. Like, that's not us. um, so I think it taught us a lot about resilience. I think it taught us a lot about keeping the cash spend of the studio extremely low. Like, even right now, like, we're spending less than 30,000 euros a month. So like really, really lean. And I think like maybe some of our American-based audience are listening to this now. I was like, wait, that's what I pay like 3 of my engineers. And to these people, I would say, yeah, come to Europe. Talent is just as good, but significantly cheaper here. So yeah, resilience and staying lean and not spending a lot of money and making do with like finding ways to do, for example, zero cost user acquisition, or deploying some guerrilla marketing tactics, or whatever other things there can be.
I wanted to jump back really quickly to something you said of, neither you nor Julie have necessarily certainly a, what many VCs would call prestige, quotey fingers, game industry background. But I think,
pedigree.
Yeah, pedigree.
I think is the word.
Yeah, pedigree of the huge companies or anything like that. And you haven't classically been a ton of game development experience necessarily, right? Like, you're coming from more of the political background and obviously very passionate about games and that kind of stuff. How have you tended to navigate those conversations and sort of represented that and refocused on what you guys do bring? Like, there's always the conversation of like founder market fit and like what is the right founding team for a given idea or for the game industry and that kind of stuff. And I think that, I've talked to a fair number of potential founders or people who are thinking about founding companies who don't come from, the pedigree studios, right? And or don't come from games at all, but are very passionate about games and have experience in tech or whatever else. How, I'm curious if you could share a bit of how you've navigated those conversations so folks who are on that journey could learn from that.
2 aspects here. First, you mentioned founder market fit, and I think we have that in the domain that we're doing more so than any other founding team I have ever met.
Mm-hmm.
And this brings me a little bit back to the origin story of why this whole thing came together. So prior to meeting Julie in Hong Kong, I was a moderator of a very, very large online game, browser-based game, based on the iconic Heroes of Might and Magic franchise, which I'm sure many of our listeners have either heard of or spent way too much time playing. Way too much. And so prior to the rights to Heroes of Might and Magic being acquired by Ubisoft, I was a moderator between 2009 and 2014 in this huge browser-based strategy game. We had like 7.5 million registered players, and concurrent usage was on par with EVE Online.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a browser-based game.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed, because I was like moderating this community of crazy, amazing people, that basically the players who spent the most time and the most money within the game had one characteristic in common, which was that they were one way or another very involved in the political interactions that occurred in this virtual world. But that the political interactions almost never occurred within the game itself. So everything related to the negotiations between the alliances, the diplomatic arrangements, the division of territory or the map within the game, the division of means of economic production and so on. All of this was always discussed off game or off platform or off world, so to speak. And this created the question in my head, which was, what would happen if actually all of those political interactions were re-embedded into the game mechanics and tied to player progression and player rewards mechanisms, which games know how to do really, really well. And so, how we actually could make politics really, truly playable. So when it comes to investor expectations around pedigree, two things are important to remember. First of all, most of the founders of the studios that today are pedigree had zero pedigree at the moment of the time of the founding of those studios. And this is true for Riot, this is true for Blizzard, this is true, I believe, for Electronic Arts and many, 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 many others. I think actually one of the exceptions to the rule is probably Supercell, because the founders of Supercell, I think, worked at Digital Chocolate. But I think it's actually more the exception rather than the rule.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. The second thing is that founder market fit trumps everything, in my opinion, and having this background, this dual background, both in terms of operating games communities and managing them on one side, and having a really, really clear understanding of the underlying dynamics of politics at large, but also how do communities in politics operate, how do political parties operate, how does the electorate operate, how do elections function across different types of systems, is actually the perfect background to building a strategy game around politics, because strategy games are notoriously systems based and systems focused and require a lot of system depth. And so instead of hiring an army of game designers, which can be very, very expensive, especially if you're a startup, we didn't have to do that because we already understand those systems. And so we can design around the academic knowledge and practical knowledge that we have acquired over the course of our academic and personal careers. So so that was a pretty clear response that we gave to the investors. And by the way, we told them upfront, around both of the aspects of the response. So first of all, there aren't that many there aren't that many pedigree founders who are doing extremely well. One, and two, then obviously the founder market fit aspect of the answer.
I want to zoom in a little bit and focus on you and your own journey specifically. So you as an individual. One of the things that a lot of founders that I talk to mention is how hard the job of being a founder is, the role of being a founder is, and often how lonely that job can really be. And so one of the things that I like to focus on, especially to learn from folks who are on that journey and to inform folks who are thinking about that journey, is how to build your own network of support for yourself as you engage in that. So the way I like to key this up usually is to ask you what you feel like your biggest struggle has been as a founder personally, like on your own, like your individual journey as a founder and your relationship to that sort of job and role. And how have you been approaching supporting yourself, making it through that really big struggle, getting to the other side of it?
I'm a very shiny person. Not in a Twilight vampire kind of way, but
I was going to go with Pokemon, but
it would have been possible with Julie. She's a huge Pokemon fan. She actually qualified for the Pokemon regional tournament, which is going to take place, I think, in Spain. So I think for me the biggest, because I'm a shiny person, the loneliness aspect hits probably the hardest. There is no silver bullet solution. It's better if you have a romantic partner. Clearly, that helps. But you have to. But then things can take like a very wide array of possible paths. In the sense, for example, culturally speaking and character-wise, I hate to be a burden on others, but at the same time, I have the advantage of not being scared to ask for help or for support, which is a good thing. But it requires for example, my closest friends to be completely okay to like ping me from time to time on whatever messenger we're using, and say, hey, like, I know you don't necessarily need help, but do you want to go out for a drink? And like fix a date and then go out for the drink. And then enforce my presence at the said drink. um so you have to know yourself really well and have a very clear understanding of the things that you need, which is really difficult. Like, I know, especially like at the beginning of our careers, or when you're just freshly out of school, like it's like we aren't yet necessarily fully formed,
Mm-hmm.
from a kind of mental self-image type, and figuring out what you want or how you function, or what makes you really happy can be really difficult. So being in that state of maturity truly helps. And then then it's the big three. It's your choice of confounders and how you interact with each other. In our case with Julie, it's incredibly easy because we actually very regularly do friendly outings as opposed to just co-founder meetings. And so, like, we will go for dinner, we will go for drinks, we will go to a movie, we will play League of Legends, we will do this and that and the other as friends, and not necessarily talking about work. And sometimes we would also talk about work, but like we will also gossip, and we will also talk about whatever is happening in our romantic lives and so on. So that really helps. So that's one. So co-founders. Number two is friends. And so establishing kind of your support system of friends, which I referred to earlier, is really important. And the third one is romantic partner, if you have one. Family, like, maybe some listeners are wondering, like, where is family in all of this? My context is a little bit particular because my family doesn't live in the same country as I do. I'm
Mm-hmm.
based in France. They live in Switzerland, and part of my family is in Finland still. So I don't have that geographic proximity to them, which uh, means that I only have kind of the other three to rely on.
Mm-hmm.
In, like, let's say, the everyday life,
Mm-hmm.
the daily struggle. And it's great, when they come visit or when we go on a family holiday together. But it's not quite the same strength of the pillar as many other people are going to have. So I'm probably more of an anomaly there, compared to many other founders.
Do you find that so you sort of mentioned some really great primary structure support structures that I think are pretty common responses, sort of to this question of, like, you know, finding your support through your relationships of these varying kinds, right? Do you find any support structures, or have you built any support structures for yourselves that is more on the habitual or behavioral side? Anything that you find that you really need to do outside of those relationships?
Yes, I have a brilliant anecdote, and unfortunately, the audience cannot actually see it. But I'm currently wearing a T-shirt which says, across multiple variety of colors, "Did somebody say karaoke?" And so we are based in Station F now, which is this huge startup campus in the heart of Paris. And it happens to be that attached to this startup campus is a really, really large restaurant. And this restaurant does open mic karaoke nights every Tuesday, from 9 p.m. to 11:30. And I have been a regular there for the last 3 years. And Julie and I were celebrating our birthdays, because, for the fun fact, we're actually born one day apart,
Very
but
nice.
in two different countries.
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking with the DJ who manages the karaoke, who knows us really well by now. And we were telling him, responding to his warm wishes, basically saying, "Greg, you have no idea to what extent your presence and this weekly event is responsible for the emotional stability and therefore the economic success of our startup."
Very nice.
I really like karaoke as a release mechanism. First of all, because it's significantly cheaper than therapy,
Mm-hmm.
And second of all, because it has this inbuilt community aspect within it. You make friends really easily. It's a very informal environment. Um, if you want to have more drinks, you can. If you want to have less drinks, it's fine as well. We actually made a lot of like friends unrelated to work and unrelated to the tech and startup ecosystem going to karaoke, which is great. And for the last fun fact, I actually met my current girlfriend at the karaoke. So it's a really wonderful idea, and I'm sure that everybody can find something recurrent. And I know some people really like to do sports, and somebody else, goes dancing or
Mm-hmm.
or plays games and so on. But I think physically being in a different place and surrounded by other people is a good north star to look at.
I am, I believe, legally required to ask the follow up question of: do you have a go to karaoke song, artist, or genre that is like your signature move?
I do. My range is pretty broad. I go from Eminem to Linkin Park to Adele and Britney. So, like, just to give you an idea, but I think my go-to signature move, if really I'm going in for the kill, would probably be "Lose Yourself" by Eminem.
Excellent, excellent, amazing. So let's take a look a little bit towards the future, right? Like you're it sounds like you're in process of closing the fundraising, so hopefully that, it'll take 3 times longer, as you sort of mentioned it always does, but hopefully that closes soon. So when you really look out, over the course of 2025, 2026 and beyond, what is on the horizon, both for yourself as an individual founder, but then also the company that you are finding you're spending a lot of time thinking about?
Individually, I really hope my current relationship works out. I have found a really wonderful person, a lovely girl. As a co-founder, I think a lot about the state of the industry, both from kind of a market perspective and where the audience preferences are at and how they are shifting through time. But that seems to be extremely advantageous to us. We actually just closed the most recent marketability campaign, which had the lowest cost and the highest click-through rates in the history of our studio, and we've been around for 6 years. So clearly, politics is resonating with people these days. I wonder why that is. So I think about the market a lot, and then I think about the state of the venture capital industry a lot as well, in games, but also outside of games. I write occasionally about it. I wrote a kind of a deep dive article analyzing some of the exits and some of the prevalent investment strategies that seem to be around, making their rounds through the venture capital ecosystem. And I wonder how this is going to evolve. Not just because of AI, because it's a nice buzzword, but ultimately, like, I need to see a little bit more substance there to actually convert myself to a true believer. I still have vivid PTSD from the Web3 and crypto games wave, so like I'm not jumping onto any hype trains too soon. So I think about where the audience preferences are going. I think about where the market is moving, and I think about where the money is going to move in the future. And then on a more micro scale, so specifically applied to our studio, I think a lot about the future release of the game. We're already in public alpha, still early, but we have multiple releases planned for 2025. One of them is coming up in April, a second one in June, and then a huge one which is going to be quite important, because that's where a lot of the kind of key features are going to truly come to light, which is planned for September, October, I believe, more October. So yeah, that's what I worry about, and that's what keeps me up at night. So it's actually quite a lot if you combine all of this. Now there are some things there that are kind of out of my control, some things there that I do have agency over, but because and just circling back to the beginning of the episode, because I believe that the day of tomorrow is always going to be than the day of today, is going to be better than the day of today. I think about it, but I'm not too worried about it.
That's good. And I always like to close out the sort of long form section of the interview with an entirely unfair question, which is, if you zoom forward in time and sort of disregard like where your current endeavor goes. So like you sort of have to try to take it out of your mind of whether it was a successful exit or you ended up closing down or whatever, right? Would you, knowing what you know now, having gone through the journey so far, would you ever found another company?
If I believe that I am fundamentally unhireable elsewhere, and not just because of my passion for karaoke at inappropriate times, there is a touch in entrepreneurship that I find really appealing, which is it is not a routine job.
Mm-hmm.
I can wake up in the morning, I can do game design, then I can jump onto a call with an investor, and then I can set up the next marketability campaign on Facebook or Google. And then I can talk about the communication strategy with Julie and like some of the things we would like to try out. And then I will be required to present myself in a presentable fashion for the next TikTok video that we're that we're shooting, and so I really like this idea that no day is the same as the other. No, factually speaking, when you're fundraising, a lot of days are the same as the day before, but kind of out even in those fundraising environments, you meet different people, you meet investors from different countries, from different funds who have different investment theses, who don't all want the same thing and don't see the same good thing from one fund to the next as a good thing. So even there you have a lot of variety, and I really, really appreciate this. So my inner fear is that maybe the experience of entrepreneurship has made me even more unhireable than I already was before.
From my experience, it has not made you more unhireable. It has actually made you more hireable. It is very valuable that people like to see it a lot. But it may have made you ungovernable. which is what a friend of mine who was on the podcast called himself ungovernable, which is why he is much more likely to do more startups.
That's a really good word. As a politics aficionada, I really appreciate this choice of word. It's a great word. I'm going to steal that.
Excellent. So the way I like to close out every interview is doing what I call an introspection lightning round. Where this comes from is actually these are a set of questions that I would share with potential co-founders, usually even almost before our first real big conversation, and we would go through them as part of the big conversation. And it really is, sort of that idea of level setting and understanding each other at a deeper level, and sort of like what would we be as a team if we were to go and co-found. And so these are just about you and your own strengths and weaknesses and that kind of stuff. And just would love to hear your answers. And the way we start is, what is your superpower?
I have 3. I'm an excellent judge of character, which is really handy when you hire and when you evaluate potential investors for a human fit. I have unkillable optimism, which we covered extensively on the podcast, so I'm not going to repeat that. And third, I'm damn good at copywriting, which is really good for everything related to narrative design, but even like when you think about messaging for your campaigns, on social media, or your ads, or where you're writing a script. And if I had to sneak in a 4th one in there, and it kind of ties to copywriting, but I tend to be in writing, not so this is not it doesn't show up in orally as well as it does in writing, but I'm very precise in my choice of words when I write, which comes from partially from the fact that English is not my native language, and conveying extremely clear what you think and what you want, especially when you're in a position of leadership, is and can be an actual superpower.
Yeah. Outside of your superpowers, what are your biggest strengths?
I'm very lovable. I have found that for a reason that I cannot explain,
Mm-hmm.
people trust me really easily,
Mm-hmm.
and I apparently inspire confidence. Um, and so people love to share personal stuff and secrets, and like they love to ask me for advice. Um, uh, and like if I didn't work in game development with my Russian passport, which I still have, even though it's not my primary passport anymore, I think it would attract a lot of suspicion about whether I have a secret spy career. But I promise here on this podcast that I don't.
No.
But yeah, I inspire a lot of confidence in people, apparently.
I feel like the best strengths are the ones that you're a little bit mystified about. You're like, I have this. I don't know why I have this. I don't understand it, but I have this. So to do the reverse, what are your big weaknesses?
I am vainglorious. I love the spotlight. I seek the spotlight. I enjoy it. I am extremely comfortable with it, but I also know that it can be a weakness in the sense that I shouldn't lose sight of the actual objective just for the sake of staying in the spotlight for an extra minute.
Mm-hmm.
A clear example of this is that I wanted to, I wanted to get the game out and call it an open beta, the game that we're working on. And we had this board meeting earlier in January, and we had an extensive discussion about the naming convention, and basically we agreed, and the rest of the board members convinced me that actually, like, if the game is not 90% complete or 95% complete, it's not worth calling it a beta because player expectations are going to be super, super high.
Mm-hmm.
So you would be much better off going through Alpha 3 and Alpha 4 and Alpha 5 and Alpha 7 and 12 and 17 before you actually call the game a beta. And I was like, but beta, but I really want to. But it's okay. They convinced me. We decided on the naming convention. It's going to be an alpha for most of the 2025. And that's okay. And I think that's a good example that illustrates my tendencies and how these tendencies are or can be or should be curbed by other people who are much smarter than me around me.
What are your stress reactions?
I isolate until I figure everything out. In particular, when the responsibility for finding a solution is on me and only on me. When the responsibility is shared, I am much more inclusive, and it's much easier for me to go and ask for help or ask for advice. And it's like I'm not ashamed of asking for help. But if the responsibility is with me and solely with me, like I have to, like I tend to close down in my bubble and like figure it out and then come back with a solution.
And when you think about work mostly, what are the things that you need to sort of regularly have from others to sort of be able to maintain a good mental state, maintain a good regulation of yourself? I sort of call this, what are your upkeep needs? The things that you need to have happen for you in order to not fall as easily into stress reactions.
I'm a big believer in hiring people who are smarter than you and getting out of their way, which is like I do not have upkeep needs, I think, that I'm aware of, that I'm conscious about. I am the absolute opposite of a micromanager. My happy place is when I give a task to somebody and I tell them like what the expected work product is, and maybe I have some ideas and some kind of notions of a potential solution to the problem which I will share, but I'm saying, look, like this is my 2 cents before I actually did any deep work on this, but like go and run with it and figure it out. And if you want to trash my solution, passing by, that's completely okay. I'm not going to hold it against you. So uh, maybe we can turn it around and say that my upkeep needs is actually other people being sufficiently autonomous and not requiring me to micromanage them.
Yep, I think.
But that's maybe kind of a cheeky reply.
No, I mean, I think it fits. Well, amazing. That is the end of the lightning round. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode. Before we close out, do you have any parting thoughts or any, marketing you want to do or shout outs or anything you want to leave here? The floor is yours here at the end of the episode.
I want to give a huge shout out to my amazing co-founder, Julie. Between the two of us, like whenever she's not in the room, I always say that she's the smart one and I'm the funny one. And whenever we're invited, for example, to like a university lecture and like for example, Julie can show up, but then it's me. Like I will always say, so hi everybody, I am this and that. Today we're going to talk about this and this. Julie's the smart one, I'm the funny one, so I don't know how much you're actually going to learn, but I promise you that we're going to have a good time. And so, yeah, I was alone today. So I don't know how much the audience learned. I hoped at least a little bit. But I had an amazing time. Thank you very much, Carl. If any of the audience members are interested in co-founder advice or fundraising advice, you can find me on LinkedIn. Pavel Afanasiev is my name. I have a pretty compelling list of investors, and also I'm fairly knowledgeable about the latest venture capital gossip in the games industry, if that's something that you're interested in. And in case you are interested in politics and want to try out our strategy MMO or register as a player, you're more than welcome to do so. The website is nebulae.world, so nebulae.world. And yeah, feel free to sign up. And Carl, thank you so much for doing this. Thank you for the podcast. Thank you for providing the space to aspiring founders or early stage founders. I think it's a great initiative, and I'm very grateful that I could be here today.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, and we will chat again, I'm sure, in the future.
Thanks for listening to the entire episode. If you enjoyed it, please share it with your friends or anyone you think could benefit from it, and leave us a positive rating or subscribe. This episode was edited by Christopher Delano, music by Jake Hull, who's available for composer work in games. And if you're interested in learning more about the Game Founder support community, go to gamefounders.org or email me at carl@gamefounders.org. Thanks so much.